I found myself standing outside Brielle's townhouse, well, what used to be our place, holding a small duffel bag in one hand and a hollow, sinking feeling in my chest. It was 2 days before Easter. I'd been invited for brunch by her mother, Lydia, who promised me it would be cordial. Civil, whatever that was supposed to mean after everything. The breeze carried that early spring scent, freshly cut grass mixed with blooming gardenias from the neighbor's yard, but none of it touched the tightness twisting in my gut. Just last night, my phone lit up with a message from Brielle. 6 words. Cold. Final. Asterisk I want a divorce. We're done. Asterisk no call. No explanation. No warning. Just those words sitting on my screen like a verdict. I must have stared at them for an hour, scrolling up, reading it over and over like maybe there was some other meaning buried between the lines. There wasn't. That was it. She ended us like I was some subscription she could cancel before the next billing cycle. I exhaled slow, trying to steady myself, shifted my grip on the bag, and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed sharp through the stillness of the morning, louder than I expected. For a second, I wondered if Brielle might open the door herself. Maybe meet me with a look, anger, sadness, something human, but it wasn't her. It was Lydia. She opened the door with that polite kind of smile people wear when they're trying too hard to act normal. "Evan, I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft, almost maternal. I gave a small nod and stepped inside. The hardwood floor felt cold under my sneakers, familiar, but distant. The place didn't look like ours anymore. The walls had new art, the kind of abstract pieces that whispered money without saying a word. A modern chandelier hung over the entryway, stylish, expensive, nothing like what we picked out when we were younger, broke, and building a life together. Lydia started leading me toward the dining room, her heels quiet on the floor. But before we made it halfway, I heard Brielle's voice drift from down the hall, sharp, bright, like she didn't have a care in the world. And just like that, I knew. I didn't belong here anymore. Too broke. I'm not wasting my life on that. I run with a different crowd now. Then came the laughter, sharp, loud, cutting, not just hers, but a few other voices chiming in like it was some kind of joke. I stopped dead in my tracks. My feet wouldn't move. The duffel bag in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, like it was pulling me straight through the floor. She knew I was here. Lydia told her I was coming. But Brielle didn't care. She said it loud on purpose, wanted me to hear it. For a second, I just stood there frozen. My heart was pounding so hard in my ears it felt deafening. Some stupid part of me wanted to walk down that hallway, look her dead in the eye, and ask her, "When did you become this person?" The girl who could talk about me like I was nothing. Like I was some mistake she was embarrassed of. But I didn't. I swallowed it, all of it, let it sit there in my throat like a stone I couldn't move. I caught Lydia glancing back at me. Her face said it all, tight, uncomfortable, like she was embarrassed for me but didn't know what to say. She didn't offer any words. Just gave me a small nod to follow her down the hall toward the guest room. I walked behind her, but I wasn't really there. I could still hear Brielle's voice, that laughter, echoing in my head like it was stuck on loop. The room she showed me to was small, neat, bare. A single bed pushed against the wall, a window looking out over the backyard garden. I set my bag down at the edge of the bed and just sat there for a while, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor like it might give me some kind of answer. But all I could hear in my head were her words. Too broke. Different circle. I always knew Brielle cared more about image, about status, than I ever did. That wasn't new. But this was different. This wasn't just pride or ambition. This was her rewriting me. Turning me into some failure in her story. Someone small. Someone forgettable. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, moving into this place when it was ours. I could still picture her curled up next to me on the old couch, reading some book, stealing glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. Where the hell did that Brielle go? I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the garden, the same garden we used to sit in together on warm nights. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like mine anymore. There was a time she used to love working in that little garden out back. I could still picture her on her knees in the dirt, sleeves rolled up, planting whatever flowers caught her eye that week. It used to feel alive, messy, real, like her. But not anymore. Now it looked like a magazine cover, trimmed hedges, perfectly spaced roses, nothing out of place. Some crew probably came by every week to keep it looking flawless, like her life now. Polished on the outside. Empty underneath. I could hear the faint sound of plates clinking in the kitchen down the hall. Voices murmuring, probably setting up for whatever fancy brunch she had planned for tomorrow. And I stood there, knowing damn well I wasn't ready to sit across from her at that table, watching her act like I was invisible. Like none of it ever happened. But I wasn't about to run. I didn't come all this way to back down. I was going to show up. Keep quiet. Get through it. Not for her. For me. Because I wasn't the one who blew it all up over a text like a coward. I wasn't the one standing in a hallway laughing like a stranger at someone I once promised to love. For a second, I thought about grabbing my phone and messaging her, asking her straight up what I ever did to deserve this. What made me so easy to discard? But I didn't. Instead, I pulled up my banking app, just needing something solid, something real to anchor me. The numbers were all there. My accounts, my investments, years of work, of discipline, of staying quiet and focused while the world ran its mouth. She didn't know about any of it. As far as Brielle was concerned, I was just the guy with the old truck and nothing going for him. Maybe that's why she stopped seeing me. Maybe that's why she thought she could humiliate me like this and walk away untouched. I locked my phone and set it down on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'd sit at her table. I'd eat her food. I'd let her talk, play whatever part she needed to. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to be a reminder, the man she never really knew. The man she left behind without ever bothering to look past the surface. And when it was over, when I walked out of that house, maybe I wouldn't just be leaving the dinner table. Maybe I'd be walking away from all of it. From her. From whatever ghost of us I'd been holding on to. Because standing in that hallway, hearing that laugh that used to belong to someone I loved, I realized something I should have seen a long time ago. She was already gone. I didn't want any part of her world anymore, not if it meant losing myself in the process. I woke up in the spare room that morning, sunlight bleeding through the old blinds, leaving these faint lines across the floor like prison bars. My duffel bag was still sitting there by the door, untouched. Like I hadn't really decided to stay, like some part of me already knew I didn't belong here. This was her house now. Brielle's world. And if I'm being honest, it felt like I'd woken up in someone else's life, not mine. I laid there for a minute, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how the hell we got here. How two people who used to laugh until it hurt ended up like this, strangers under the same roof. And that laugh? God, I could still hear it from yesterday, sharp, cold, calling me broke like I was some charity case who'd wandered into her perfect little life. I pushed the thought down, swung my legs over the bed, and splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom. No point sitting in it. I threw on a clean shirt, ran a hand through my hair, and headed toward the kitchen. Whatever was coming today, I'd handle it. I'd figure out the rest later. As I walked down that quiet hallway, I couldn't help but think about the woman I married. Brielle used to be different. She used to be alive, not just performing for an audience. We met at this tiny bookstore downtown, one of those spots nobody knew about except for people like us. She was standing there flipping through some travel guide, mumbling to herself about backpacking through Chile or Peru. I remember making some dumb joke about llamas, and she laughed so hard she dropped the book. That was the girl I fell for. She was warm. Curious. Real. None of it was for show back then. But little by little, it all shifted. It started small, a new crowd she wanted to run with, some invite-only party here, a networking event there. But it built. Fast. Next thing I knew, everything we did had to be seen. Had to be shared. Had to look perfect. Date nights turned into photo ops. Trips weren't about the moment anymore, they were about the caption. And somewhere in all of that noise, the woman I loved got lost. Or maybe she just left me behind. I never belonged in that world of hers, not really. That picture she painted of the life she wanted? I didn't fit in it. I'm a numbers guy. A quiet worker. I build things in the background, systems, patterns, long-term plays most people don't even notice until years down the line. I don't flash money around or care about being seen. But to Brielle, that just made me invisible. She had no idea I'd spent years quietly stacking wealth, brick by brick, move by move. Last I checked, my net worth sat somewhere around $312 million, tied up in investments, properties, early-stage companies I backed before anyone knew their names. But I never told her. Not because I was keeping some dark secret, but because, to me, it never mattered the way it would have mattered to her. I wasn't chasing status. I wasn't trying to impress anybody. I still drove the same old gray Honda I'd had for a decade. My jeans were worn in, my boots scuffed from years of real use. My life was simple on purpose. I liked it that way. I poured myself a coffee in her spotless kitchen, the fancy machine humming low, almost too polished for a house like this. The place was quiet, but I could still feel her presence everywhere. The energy. The brand. Brielle didn't live in this house, she performed in it. Marble counters shined like showroom floors under the soft ceiling lights. On the kitchen island sat a neat stack of magazines, her face on the cover of one, beaming like she had the whole world eating out of her hand. I took a slow sip of coffee, bitter, hot, and stared at that cover for a second longer than I meant to. She'd rewritten us, rewritten me. In her story, I was the guy who couldn't keep up. The man who didn't want enough. But she never saw the late nights I spent poring over market data while she was out clinking glasses at some rooftop event. She didn't know about the scholarships I funded behind the scenes. The non-profits I supported quietly because it felt right, not because anyone was watching. To Brielle, wealth had to be loud. Luxury handbags, private chefs, champagne brunches that made it onto somebody's story. To me, wealth was freedom. Quiet freedom. I didn't need some sprawling mansion to prove I'd made it. I already knew I had. I grew up in a house where money was always tight, where my folks saved every penny like the next storm was already on its way. That kind of upbringing sticks with you. It taught me to be smart with what I had, to plan ahead, to build something steady. But Harper never saw it that way. To her, my caution looked like weakness. She didn't want a partner who knew how to grow wealth quietly. She wanted someone who matched her curated life, someone who'd smile for photos and play the part of the flashy, picture-perfect husband. I heard the creak of slippers behind me, and there was Lorraine, Harper's mom, carrying in a plate piled with croissants and scones. "You're up early," she said, her voice soft, her smile warm but worn out. I gave a small nod and set my coffee down on the edge of the counter. "Didn't sleep much," I murmured. She didn't press. Just started laying things out for what I figured was one of Harper's weekend brunches. I watched her for a second, wondering if she saw it too, how far gone her daughter seemed in all of this. This house didn't feel lived in. It felt staged. Like someone was always watching. I wanted to ask if she ever worried about Harper, if she noticed how performative everything had become. But I stayed quiet. Instead, I helped her carry plates into the dining room. The table was already set, long, spotless, the kind you see in magazines, complete with floral arrangements and crystal that looked like it hadn't been touched. It was all too perfect. Like a set waiting for the lead actress to walk in and play her part. I couldn't stop thinking about tomorrow, about sitting through yet another one of Harper's casual brunches surrounded by people who probably all looked and sounded just like her now. It wasn't that I couldn't afford this life. I just didn't want it. This whole scene, it wasn't me. My wins came in silence. They lived in spreadsheets, slow deals, long games, not in overpriced champagne and hollow compliments. Harper believed she'd moved past me. But maybe the truth was simpler. Maybe I was never playing the same game in the first place. As I placed a neat stack of cloth napkins beside each plate, this strange sort of calm came over me. Not anger. Not regret. Just clarity. She could call me broke, mock me, twist our history however she wanted, but none of that changed who I was. I knew what I'd built. I knew what mattered. It wasn't flashy. It didn't come with a curated feed or a caption for strangers to like. But it was real. It was mine. And maybe, at least for now, that was enough. Walking into that Easter brunch felt like stepping onto the set of some show I was never cast for. Everything looked staged. The dining room was drowned in white linens, gold-trimmed plates, and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my truck payment. Off in the corner, a string quartet played something soft and forgettable, the kind of background music that blended right into the sound of champagne glasses tapping together. Harper had gone all out. Or maybe her event planner had, didn't really matter. I found my seat way down at the far end of the table, wedged between a decorative plant and an empty chair like I'd been added to the guest list as an afterthought. Across from me, there she was, Harper, sitting in some off-white designer dress, her hair pinned up just so, like she'd walked straight out of a glossy magazine spread. She barely noticed me. Her new crowd filled the seats around her, all of them perfectly styled, perfectly filtered versions of people. There was Lila, a real estate influencer with a laugh like wind chimes, the kind that sounded rehearsed. Next to her sat Grant, some hedge fund guy who kept checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. And then there was Tessa, a lifestyle vlogger who filmed literally everything, even the way the butter was shaped on the dish. They were loud, polished, shiny. Their voices bounced around the high ceilings like this whole place was built just to echo them. And me? I just sat there, quiet, knowing I didn't belong here. Not because I wasn't enough. But because I never wanted to be part of this world in the first place. I kept my head down, just staring at the plate in front of me, some fancy-looking quiche with a name I wouldn't even know how to say out loud. Jules had been the one to push me into coming here. She said it'd be good for everyone, good to stay connected, good to show face, good for whatever polite reason made her feel better. But sitting there, I wasn't so sure. The whole room felt thick, like I was breathing through a filter of fake smiles and filtered lives. And I could feel Marin's eyes working hard not to land on me, like even making eye contact would be a mess she didn't want to explain. She didn't want her crowd noticing me. Didn't want me pulling focus. The champagne kept pouring, and the conversation started circling the usual empty stuff, vacations to places I'll never care about, new investment deals, who got spotted at what rooftop bar. I didn't say a word. Just kept slicing my food into smaller and smaller pieces like that would make the whole scene easier to swallow. Then I heard it, Marin's voice slicing clean through the noise like it always used to. "Everyone, I have an announcement." She leaned in, smiling that tight little smile that never reached her eyes, the one I used to know meant she was about to make the whole room hers. The table went still. Glasses hovered midair. "I'm starting over," she said. "New chapter. New energy." She let it hang there for a second, the pause just long enough to land like a headline, and then she let out this dramatic little sigh. And that's when she did it. Her eyes barely flicked my way, quick, sharp, like tossing a stone in my direction. "I left Caleb," she said, like she was commenting on the weather. "Poor guy. Just didn't have the drive. I can't waste the best years of my life with someone who's allergic to ambition." And just like that, laughter exploded around me. Quick. Loud. That sharp kind of laughter people use when they're glad it's not about them. Jenna clapped a hand over her mouth like she was shocked but loving every second. Nate gave this slow, smug grin like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And Tori, the influencer of the group, tilted her phone just slightly, probably recording the whole thing for her followers to eat up later. My face went hot. But it wasn't shame. It wasn't regret either. It was something colder. Harder. Maybe anger. Maybe just the quiet kind of disbelief you feel when somebody turns your life into a cheap joke for their audience. She said it like I was nothing but a punchline. And I sat there, watching them all laugh, knowing I wouldn't forget it. She had planned that. No doubt in my mind. She'd probably gone over it in her head 100 times before tonight, every word, every pause, every fake little smile. I set my fork down. Slow. Steady. My hands didn't shake, even if my pulse was doing its own thing. Around me, the table kept right on laughing, that rich, polished kind of laughter that starts blending together if you sit in it long enough. I caught a quick look at Jules. She was sitting close to Marin, and she wasn't laughing. She just stared down at her plate, lips pressed tight like she didn't want to be part of this any more than I did. But no one else noticed me. No one cared. I could have stood up right then. Could have walked out without saying a word, maybe even let the door slam behind me so they'd at least have to pause for a second. But I didn't. I stayed right where I was, kept my eyes down, staring at this overpriced slice of quiche like I was studying it for a test. Little green flecks running through it, parsley, maybe? Or chives. Didn't matter. What mattered was what shifted inside me in that moment. Like something heavy dropping into place, like a gear finally locking in. Marin thought she'd won. She really believed she could stand there, toss out a line like that, and erase me from her story with a smug little laugh and a glass of champagne. She thought I was just some washed-up mistake in faded jeans, a nobody who didn't belong anywhere near her polished, curated life. She didn't see me. Not the real me. She didn't see the years I'd spent building something solid, quietly, steadily, without needing to show it off. She didn't know about the work I'd done, the life I'd carved out for myself on my own terms. And I wasn't sitting here to prove anything to her. That's not why I came. But as I sat there, listening to her laugh like I didn't exist, I realized something else. I wasn't invisible. Not to me. I picked up my water, let the cool glass settle in my palm, took a slow drink. The noise around me started shifting again, their laughter fading, their attention moving on to whatever shiny thing was next. Somebody was going on about a yacht now. Or some exclusive art show. It all blurred together. I looked at Marin, just once. She was smiling, of course. But I saw it. It didn't reach her eyes. It looked brittle, like glass stretched too thin, like she was still performing for a crowd she wasn't sure wouldn't turn on her the second she stumbled. And I wondered, for just a second, if she felt it. The emptiness of all this. Part of me thought I should feel sorry for her. But I didn't. She'd made her choice. And she made damn sure everybody in that room heard it. The string band over by the window drifted into another song, something slow, almost sorrowful, like background music for a scene you already know ends badly. I pushed my plate away. Barely touched the food. Couldn't even remember what it tasted like. I wasn't sitting there because I couldn't afford this life. Money wasn't the issue. It never was. I didn't belong here because I refused to play her game. I told myself to get through the rest of this brunch. Shake a few hands. Nod at a few faces I'd never see again. Say my goodbyes without causing a scene. Then I'd go back to my world, the real one. The one I built. The one that didn't need an audience to matter. Let Harper have her moment. Let her soak up the applause, the attention, the shiny new version of herself. Me? I'd hold on to what I've always had, myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Later that night, back at my loft, I sat by the window. The city stretched out in front of me, alive in that restless way it always was. You could hear it through the glass, car horns, voices trailing off down side streets, the steady hum of life moving forward whether you were ready or not. I sat at my desk, laptop open, soft blue glow lighting up the dark corners of the room. My dashboard was right there, clean, precise, lines moving across the screen like a pulse. Investments humming along in the background, stocks, property, renewable energy funds, the boring, steady kind of work nobody at that brunch would care to ask about. A tech fund out of Copenhagen. A real estate project in Vancouver. An AI firm in Dublin I bought in early before anyone even knew its name. And sitting there in the bottom corner of the screen, clear as day, $312 million. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning under me, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Her words from earlier wouldn't leave me alone, Harper, sitting there in front of everyone like a queen on her throne, saying I was too small-minded, too broke, too allergic to ambition. Funny thing was, it didn't even sting. Not anymore. It just felt off. Like she wasn't talking about me at all. She was talking about some old version of me, a ghost I left behind a long time ago. I clicked over to my charitable fund, the one I'd set up for things that actually mattered. Scholarships, disaster relief, micro-loans for communities most people never even thought about. Last week, I wired $50,000 to a school in a remote village in India for new textbooks. The week before that, I'd paid for medical supplies at a clinic in Haiti. No press releases. No staged photos. Just quietly doing what I could to make a real difference. That's who I was. Not the guy Simone laughed at. I found myself thinking back to when it all started. Those early days when she used to tease me for staying up late, staring at my spreadsheets, drowning in numbers. "You're such a nerd," she'd say, but her smile always made me feel like she was proud of me. Proud of how focused I was back then. I thought she understood my drive. My need to build something real, something that lasted. But as her world got louder, mine stayed quiet. While she was out chasing whatever social event was hot that week, I was diving deep into markets, making the kind of moves that would matter years down the line. She timed her Instagram posts. I timed investments. I didn't need a Rolex or a corner office to know I was winning. My success wasn't measured by what I wore or what anyone saw. It was in the numbers. It was in the lives I'd touched without a single camera on me. I stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the city. My loft was small, just a bedroom, a kitchen, and this desk piled high with notebooks and papers. No marble countertops. No chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. Paid for in cash. No debt collectors, no pretense. Simone would have hated it. She'd probably call it depressing. The one time she came over after we split, I just shrugged it off. Honestly, it felt like freedom to me. I didn't need her approval, or anyone's. Thinking about that brunch, the way her friends laughed like they were all in on some big secret, I realized they didn't know me. They had no idea that I'd turned down a hedge fund job because I didn't want to play their game of suits and ego-stroking. I'd chosen my own path. It was slow, steady, invisible, and it worked. My phone buzzed from the desk, a message from my dad checking in. "You okay, son? Heard about the divorce." I quickly typed back, "I'm fine, just moving forward." He didn't know the whole story either. No one did. That's the thing about wealth like mine. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. I sat back down and scrolled through my dashboard. A solar project I funded in Kenya was hitting its targets. A coding bootcamp I'd backed in Chicago just graduated its first class. Small wins stacking up. I couldn't help but wonder what Simone would think if she saw all of this. Her poor ex-husband, quietly making a difference. Would she care? Probably not. She'd only see what wasn't there, the yacht, the penthouse, the spotlight that she craved. I closed my laptop, watching the screen fade to black. The loft felt quiet, but not empty. I thought about tomorrow, about what was coming next. Simone had made her move, her text, her announcement, her laughter. She thought she had written the end of our story, but she hadn't. I wasn't done yet. I didn't know exactly how, but I was going to make the truth come out. Not for her, not for some petty revenge, but for myself, because I was tired of being invisible to the one person who should have truly seen me. I got up and walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and just stood there staring at the sink. Outside, the city hummed along, indifferent, and in that moment, something inside me clicked. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wouldn't do it with a big scene or the way she liked to make noise, but I would do it on my terms, in my own time. I'd let the world see who Nathan Foster really was. And when they did, Simone would have to face the man she had walked away from, not with anger, but with the quiet truth of everything I'd built. The next morning, I sat at my desk, my coffee cooling beside me, when my phone buzzed. It was an email from a friend of mine over at a finance magazine. The subject line read, "You might want to see this." I clicked it open, and there it was, a feature in a well-known publication titled The Invisible Billionaire. My stomach dropped. They'd used a pseudonym, but it was clearly me. My investments, my strategies. They even had a blurry picture from an award ceremony I'd attended the year before. The article called me a ghost in global finance, a man who built a fortune without a single headline. It wasn't wrong, but seeing it out there in public made it feel like someone had just yanked the curtain off my life. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I'd always kept my work quiet, not just because I liked it that way, but because I didn't trust how people would react. Money changed how they saw you, and I didn't want any of that noise. The secret was out now, or at least it was starting to leak. I couldn't help but wonder who had tipped them off. Maybe a colleague I'd trusted, or someone who'd put the pieces together. It didn't matter anymore. It was done. I opened the article again, skimming through it. They'd gotten most of it right, my investments in the energy fund, the startup projects, the anonymous donations. They hadn't used my real name, but that photo of me was clear enough. Anyone who knew me could recognize it. I set my phone down and rubbed my eyes, trying to clear my head. Part of me wanted to reach out to the magazine and ask them to pull the piece. But another part of me, the part that remembered Simone's laugh at brunch, felt like I wanted it to spread, not out of spite, but because I was tired of being the shadow she'd painted me to be. The rest of the day, I tried to focus on my dashboard, but my mind kept drifting back to the article. By the time evening came, my phone was buzzing constantly. Texts, emails, and a few missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Word was definitely getting out. I ignored most of it, but one message caught my eye. It was from an old friend from college. He said the article was making its rounds in finance circles. "People are losing it, man," he wrote. "They want to know who you are." I didn't reply. Instead, I grabbed my jacket and went for a walk. The air felt cool against my skin as I walked through the streets. People were laughing, cars crawled by, neon signs flickering above. I felt exposed, like the article had been written all over my face, but no one seemed to notice. It was always the same, just a guy in a hoodie, blending in. That's how I'd lived, under the radar. Moving quietly. Simone hated that about me. She wanted a husband who stood out, who could match her perfectly curated world. I wasn't that guy. I'd rather fund a school than buy a flashy car. I got back to my loft, grabbed my phone, and checked it again. More messages. One stood out, a text from Ava, Simone's real estate friend from brunch. "Is this you?" she asked, with a link to the article. I didn't bother replying. Let her wonder. But it hit me that the news was reaching Simone's circle now, and the thought made my heart race. I could already picture her, scrolling through that article, seeing that blurry photo of me. Would she laugh it off like she always did, or would it hit her the same way it hit me? Hard. Unavoidable. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next day, my phone lit up with an unknown number calling. I let it ring, but when it rang again and again, I picked up. I knew exactly who it was. Grant, her voice came through tight, like she was holding her breath. "Did you see it?" she asked, the words coming out quick, frantic. I stayed silent for a second, just to let her squirm. Finally, I spoke. "Yeah, I saw it." She rushed on, talking fast. Ava had shown her the article at brunch. Everyone had gone quiet. Her glass had slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that you?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, the phone cool against my ear. "What do you think?" I asked, not giving her anything. She made a noise, half laugh, half gasp. "You never said anything. You let me think." She trailed off, and I could hear her breath catching, uneven, sharp. I didn't feel the silence. This wasn't the moment for me to explain, it was her turn to face whatever was left. "I have to go," I said, cutting the call before she could respond. I hung up, and the loft fell into a quiet that almost felt foreign. All I could hear was the hum of the fridge and the distant rumble of the city outside. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the article again. That photo of me, smiling faintly at some gala, stared back. It was a version of myself I barely recognized. I had forgotten that Simone had seen it. Now, my so-called poor ex-husband wasn't so poor after all. But the thing was, I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt free. Like the weight of her words, her laughter, was finally starting to lift. After Simone's call, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, notifications piling up, texts, voicemails, emails from people I hadn't heard from in years. Most were curious, some were nosy, and a few were outright asking for money. I muted everything, turned the phone face down on my desk, and tried to tune it all out. The article about the invisible billionaire was spreading faster than I'd anticipated, and I wasn't prepared for the noise that came with it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, walked over to the window, and looked out at the city below. Delivery trucks rumbled past, and a jogger weaved through pedestrians on the sidewalk. The city was waking up, but I wasn't sure I was ready to face it just yet. Life kept moving, and I wanted to hold on to that quiet moment, but my phone buzzed against the counter. Simone, again, for the 14th time. I sighed, knowing she wasn't going to stop, despite everything I'd told myself. Against my better judgment, I answered. Grant, she said, her voice high and panicked, like she'd been running. Why didn't you tell me? You let me make a fool of myself. I stayed calm, leaning against the counter. You said I wasn't worth your time. I agreed. There was a sharp intake of breath before she exploded. Do you know how bad this looks? Her voice was tight with frustration, and then she was off, words pouring out like a storm. Betrayal, accusations of me hiding things, her desperate plea to talk it out, everything coming at me in one breath. I just listened, letting her spill, not reacting. I didn't need to. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I said, you never looked past the surface. She screamed again, and it hurt my ear. You could have said something. You watched me. You let everyone think you were nothing. I didn't argue. There was no point. She wasn't hearing me. She wasn't hearing the truth, she was hearing her own embarrassment, her own decision staring back at her. I'm done here, Simone, I said, and hung up. The silence that followed felt heavier, but not in a bad way. It was like a weight had been lifted. I sat down at my desk, staring at the blank screen of my laptop. Her words kept swirling in my head. Why didn't I tell her? I'd asked myself that 100 times, especially after her message about the divorce. But the truth was simple. I didn't need to tell her. She already knew. She just hadn't wanted to see it. I never told her because I didn't need to. My life wasn't about impressing her or anyone else. Everything I built for myself, for what I believed in, schools, clinics, startups that could actually change lives. Simone? She wanted the spotlight. I wanted depth. I thought about the years we spent together, how I'd always tried to bridge the gap between us. I'd go to her events, always standing in the corner while she worked the room. I'd listen to her talk about her brand, her followers, her vision for the future. I thought she'd eventually grow out of it, return to the woman who used to laugh over ridiculous things like llamas in bookstores. But she didn't. She leaned even harder into the flash, and I stayed where I was, out of sight, in the shadows. Maybe that's where we lost each other. My phone buzzed again, but it wasn't Simone this time. It was a text from my mom. Asterisk saw the news. Is that really you, asterisk? I smiled as I typed back, yeah, Mom, it's me. She didn't know the whole story, of course. No one did, not really. I kept my parents in the dark, not out of secrecy, but because I didn't want to change how they saw me. They were happy in their small town, proud of their son. The consultant. If they knew the numbers, they'd either worry or worse, they'd brag. I didn't want that. I opened my laptop, pulled up my dashboard. The numbers were steady, like always, my anchor in all this chaos. I clicked through to check on a scholarship fund I'd started. I'd set up the scholarship fund for low-income students. Applications were rolling in, and I was reading stories from kids who reminded me of myself at their age, eager to learn but terrified they wouldn't get the chance. That's why I did this. That's why I stayed quiet about everything. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it could do when no one was watching. But Simone's call kept eating at me. Not her anger, but that question she asked. Why didn't you tell me? Maybe I should have told her earlier, when we were still trying, but by the end, it wouldn't have mattered. She didn't want me. She wanted a version of me that didn't exist, the one that matched her Instagram feed. But I wasn't that guy. I never would be. I shut my laptop and stood up, stretching my arms. The city was alive outside, but none of it had anything to do with my drama. Simone could scream all she wanted, but nothing would change what was. I wasn't bitter, I was just done. Done carrying her judgment, done letting her define me. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. A walk would clear my head, help me figure out what came next. One thing was clear, though. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of something else. The days after Simone's meltdown felt like the calm after a storm, quiet, but you could still feel the damage lingering. I stuck to my routine, simple coffee, work, walks around the city to keep my head clear, but the world wasn't going to let me stay invisible anymore. The article about the invisible billionaire had spread far beyond the finance world. It was popping up on social media, even getting a mention on a morning talk show. I kept my phone on silent, but there was no ignoring the ripple effect of it all. Simone's circle, that polished, elite group she adored, was starting to crack. I picked up bits and pieces through the grapevine, mutual friends who messaged me updates. Ava, the real estate influencer, had stopped inviting Simone to her brunches. Mason, the hedge fund guy, was dodging her calls. Bianca, the vlogger, posted some cryptic message about fake friends, and everyone was pretty sure it was aimed at Simone. I didn't go looking for any of this. It just found its way to me, like debris washing up after a storm. I sat at my desk, scrolling through my investment dashboard, trying to focus on numbers instead of the drama. The markets were steady, and my solar project in Kenya was hitting new milestones. Still, my mind kept drifting back to Simone's world falling apart. I didn't feel good about it, not exactly. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I couldn't pretend it didn't sting to know she was hurting. Part of me, the part that remembered the woman I once loved, the one who made me believe in forever, wanted to call her, see if she was okay. But I didn't. She'd built this mess herself, not me. Just as I sat with that thought, my phone lit up. It was a call from my parents. I answered, bracing myself for the questions. "Grant, we saw that article," my dad said, his voice a strange mix of awe and confusion. "Is that really you? All that money?" I leaned back in my chair, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, Dad, it's me." My mom's voice came through next, softer than his. "Why didn't you tell us, honey? We thought you were just, getting by." I smiled, even though they couldn't see it. Honestly, I preferred it that way. I didn't want things to change. There was a brief silence, and I could picture them in their living room, Dad in his old recliner, Mom messing with a dish towel in her hands. "We're proud of you," Dad finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "Always have been." It hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, fighting back the lump in my throat. I told them I'd visit soon, then ended the call. Their words stayed with me, grounding me in a way the numbers on my screen never could. But Simone's parents, they were a different story. Later that day, I got a text from her mom, Ellen. It was short, apologetic, "I'm so sorry, Grant. I didn't know. None of you asked, I didn't bother replying. What was there to say?" They'd watched Simone tear me down at brunch, either laughing along or staying silent. Now they were scrambling, but fixing their guilt wasn't my job. I'd also heard that her dad was confused, asking people in circles what went wrong. Her new boyfriend, or whatever he was, had ghosted her, probably spooked by the drama. I tried to push all that out of my head, focus on what mattered. My loft was still my sanctuary. Books lined the shelves, a half-finished puzzle sat on the coffee table. It was quiet, still, and for a moment, it felt like everything was as it should be. There was no sign of Simone's chaos here, and honestly, I preferred it that way. I opened my laptop again, checking on a scholarship fund I'd set up. A new round of thank you letters had come through from students, kids who had a chance at college because of me. One of them mentioned her mom crying when she got the acceptance letter. That's what kept me going. Not Simone's fallout, not the world suddenly turning its attention to my bank account. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her circle crumbling. Bianca's vlog had gone viral, her comment about throwing away diamonds for rhinestones cutting deeper than she probably intended. I watched it once, saw the comments piling up, people calling Simone shallow, saying she'd blown her chance. It was brutal, but I didn't feel bad for her. She'd chosen that world. Those people. And now she had to live with it. I stood up and walked over to the window. The city stretched out below me, and I couldn't help but think about the article. It had changed everything, not just for Simone, but for me too. I wasn't invisible anymore, and that was a strange feeling. I'd always preferred the quiet, the freedom to move around unnoticed. Maybe there was something to be said for stepping into the light, not for recognition, but for honesty. Simone's world was falling apart, but mine was still intact, and for now, that was enough. Then, out of nowhere, I got an invitation to an investor summit, a sleek email from a conference organizer who'd read the "Invisible Billionaire" article. They wanted me to speak, to share my perspective on finance. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my coffee growing cold on the desk in front of me. Public speaking? Not my thing. Never had been. I preferred working behind the scenes, letting the results do the talking. But something about that invitation stayed with me. Maybe it was the opportunity to finally set the record straight, not just about my wealth, but about who I was. So, reluctantly, I agreed. And for the next week, I second-guessed myself at every turn. The day of the summit, I stood backstage, tugging at the collar of my new blazer, nerves tightening in my chest. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled, all eyes waiting for the guy who'd kept himself out of the spotlight for so long. My palms were sweating, but I forced myself to breathe. When they called my name, I stepped out, the bright lights hitting my face. The room was silent, expectant. I gripped the podium, trying to steady myself. I didn't talk about markets or strategies. Instead, I went deeper. I told them the greatest freedom wasn't in proving your worth to anyone. It was in choosing not to. I spoke about building wealth quietly, about making an impact instead of chasing applause. I didn't mention Simone, but her shadow lingered in every word I spoke about living authentically. The room listened, really listened. And when I finished, the applause was there, loud but not overwhelming. I felt, okay. Like I'd said what I needed to say. The video of my talk went viral by the next morning. It spread across finance blogs, social media, even news sites. I didn't watch it, but I saw the notifications stacking up, messages from strangers, colleagues, and even a few people I hadn't heard from since high school. Most of the feedback was positive, but there were some skeptics too, calling me a myth or a fluke. I didn't pay much attention to any of it. I'd said what I needed to say, and the world could take it however it wanted. What I didn't anticipate, though, was the flood of emails that followed. Nonprofits, young investors, and even a few kids asking for advice. But there was one that stood out, a note from Simone's younger sister, Camille. I hadn't heard from her in years. She'd always been the quiet one, never as in the spotlight as her sister. Her message was short, but it hit me harder than I expected. Thank you for funding the mental health program at my school. It saved my friend's life. I had no idea it was you. I sat there staring at the screen, my throat tight. I'd completely forgotten about that donation, just a small grant I'd sent to a local college a year ago. To me, it was just another line on a balance sheet. But to Camille, it had meant everything. I quickly typed a reply, keeping it simple, glad I could help. Tell your friend I'm rooting for her. I didn't mention Simone, and neither did she, but that email stayed with me. It was a reminder of why I did this in the first place, why I'd kept it quiet for so long. The summit had shifted something in me. For years, I'd avoided the spotlight, thinking it would only complicate things. The video of my talk blew up by the next morning. It spread everywhere, finance blogs, social media, even news outlets. I didn't watch it myself, but the notifications came in fast. Messages flooded my phone from people I hadn't heard from in ages, colleagues, old classmates, strangers. Most were supportive, but there were a few skeptics who called me a fluke, a myth. I didn't let it bother me. I had said what I needed to say, and how the world took it was out of my hands. But then, the emails started pouring in, nonprofits, young investors, even some kids asking for advice. One caught my attention more than the others, Camille, Simone's younger sister. I hadn't seen her in years. She was always the quiet one, overshadowed by Simone's spotlight. Her message was brief, but it hit me right in the gut. Thank you for funding the mental health program at my school. It saved my friend's life. I had no idea it was you. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling this tightness in my chest. I had completely forgotten about that donation, a small grant to a local college. To me, it was just another expense, but to Camille, it had made all the difference. I quickly typed a response, keeping it simple, I'm glad I could help. Tell your friend I'm rooting for her. Neither of us mentioned Simone, but I didn't need to. That message stuck with me, it was a reminder of why I did this. I'd kept my actions under the radar for so long, thinking that attention would complicate things. But maybe, just maybe, there was a reason to step into the light. I wasn't expecting anyone to just show up. But when I checked the intercom screen, I froze. There she was. Simone. Standing outside in a simple sweater, jeans, and no makeup, her hair pulled back. She looked like the woman I remembered from years ago, not the polished version I'd seen at brunch. For a second, I just stared, my finger hovering over the buzzer. A part of me wanted to pretend I didn't see her, let her stand there long enough to reconsider and leave. But then something stopped me. Maybe it was the pull of curiosity. Maybe I was just tired of avoiding the closure we never had. I buzzed her in. She knocked softly before I opened the door. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, but she held herself together, steady. Can we talk? Her voice was small, almost fragile. I just nodded and stepped aside. She walked in, scanning the space like she was seeing it for the first time, no marble countertops or flashy decor, just a few books, a worn couch, and my desk cluttered with papers. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. I leaned against the kitchen counter, waiting for her to speak. I'm sorry, she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. She wasn't looking at me, not yet. For everything, she added, and I wasn't sure if she meant the divorce, the way things fell apart at brunch, or something deeper. What? I asked, honestly lost in the moment, still caught up in the things that didn't really matter anymore. Her words came slowly, like she had to dig deep to find them. I didn't see you, Grant. Not really. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. I was blinded by everything, by the pressure, the people, the need to be seen as someone important. I thought you were holding me back, she said, finally looking me in the eye. but I was wrong. You were. You're incredible. Her voice cracked, and I watched her wipe at her cheek. I felt a shift, something subtle, not love, but maybe pity. For all the months I'd spent replaying everything, the laughs, the cruelty, seeing her like this, raw and unguarded, I didn't feel anger. Just distance. I appreciate that, I said, keeping my voice steady, but it's done. She flinched, like she was hoping for something more. Can't we try again? She asked, leaning in, her voice desperate. I see you now. I get it, your work, your heart. We could rebuild. I shook my head, gently but firmly. You weren't wrong about one thing. I don't belong in your circle. I built my own. Her face crumpled, and the tears started falling faster. I messed up, she whispered. I threw away something real. I didn't argue, she wasn't wrong. But I wasn't here to fix her regret. I stood, walked to the door, and opened it slowly. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said quietly. But it's not here. She stood up, shaky, and walked past me, out the threshold. She paused, like she might say something more, but before she could, I closed the door. The sound of the lock clicking echoed through the quiet loft. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. Was I waiting for relief? For sadness? It was a mix of both, tangled together. Her apology was real, I could tell, but it didn't change anything. She had seen me too late, and I wasn't the same man. She left, and I was already moving on. I went back to my chair, picked up my book, but didn't read a word. Instead, all I could think about were the years we lost, her chasing a life that never really suited her, and me building one she'd never understand. I didn't hate her. Honestly, I didn't even miss her. Not in the way I thought I would. What I missed was the idea of us. That hope we'd once had, the one we started with, but it was gone now, and no apology could ever bring it back. Outside, the city kept moving, cars zooming by, voices echoing, life carrying on like always. But my loft was quiet, still. Not empty, though. I meant it when I said I'd built my own circle. Not one of influencers or high society, but one of purpose, of small victories and projects that mattered. Simone wanted a second chance, but I didn't need one. I was already whole. I set the book aside and walked over to the window, my eyes drifting across the skyline. She was probably still out there, heading to her car, lost in her emotions, either crying or cursing, or maybe both. In my own way, I wished her well, but I didn't look back. That door was closed, on her, on us, on the weight of her choices. I was free, not because of her apology, but because I'd made the choice to be. A few days later, I stepped off a plane in Nepal, the air crisp and cold with the sharpness of the mountains. It hit me in the chest, a quiet thrill. The rural school I'd helped fund was just a bumpy jeep ride away, tucked into a valley where kids walked miles for the chance to learn. I'd come to see it for myself, not for photos or recognition, but because I needed to feel the earth beneath my feet to know my work was real. The past few months had been a blur, Simone's apology, the speech at the summit, the world suddenly taking an interest in me, but standing there, in that quiet place, I felt something shift. I needed a break, a moment to reconnect with the reason I'd started all of this in the first place. The school was small, just a handful of classrooms with walls painted in bright colors, and desks smoothed by the wear of little hands. The principal, a woman with soft, welcoming eyes, gave me a tour, proudly pointing out the new roof. The kids, curious and excited, watched me closely, some of them giggling behind their hands. I couldn't help but smile and wave at them. It felt like something in me finally loosened. This was it. This was enough. I didn't need anything more from Nepal. From there, I flew to Kenya to check on a clean water project I'd funded. The village was full of life, women chatting with one another, kids chasing a soccer ball, and the hum of pipes delivering fresh water. An older man, with a firm handshake, thanked me in broken English. I nodded and told him it was my honor. I didn't linger long. I'd seen the pumps working, that's all that mattered. The money had gone where it needed to. Next, I visited a tech startup in Eastern Europe. A group of young coders was working on software to track renewable energy. They were scrappy, driven, exactly the kind of people I'd have bet on years ago. We talked shop over cheap coffee, and before I left, I promised them more funding once they hit their next milestone. When I finally made it back to my loft, weeks had passed, but I felt more grounded than I had in years. The city buzzed outside, the same as always, but something in me had shifted. I was different now, calmer, clearer. I sat down at my desk to update my portfolio. The numbers ticked along, familiar and comforting. A mentorship program I had recently joined was about to start, and soon I'd be paired with a group of kids eager to learn about finance. I'd already met a few sharp, eager people, hungry for knowledge and full of questions. I liked it. It kept me sharp, too. But as I sat there, I couldn't help but think about Simone, about that Easter brunch when she laughed and called me too poor. It felt like it happened a lifetime ago. Her words had stung, thin and sharp, but now, they just didn't matter. I could still hear her voice, cracked and full of regret, the way she looked at me like I was her last chance. I didn't hate her for what she'd said. I didn't even pity her anymore. She'd made her choices, and I had made mine. I leaned back, letting my gaze drift up to the ceiling. True wealth, I realized, wasn't about the numbers on my screen, though they helped. It was about this, the freedom to live life my way, to build what mattered, to help without needing recognition. I'd spent years in the background, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need anyone's permission to be who I was. And still, I chose to lift others up quietly. Always quietly. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Camille, Simone's sister, checking in on the mental health program. I smiled and typed a quick response. She didn't bring up Simone, and neither did I. The past was buried, hidden under new projects, new goals. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city. The lights twinkled in the distance. Each one held a story I'd never know. But my story? It was still unfolding. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was real. I thought about the kids in Nepal, the clean water in Kenya, the young coders with their big dreams. That's what I had chosen, not the stage or the applause, but purpose. Simone always wanted more. Me? I wanted enough. And standing there, alone in my loft, I knew I'd found it.